In this bill to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Mr Speaker.
Andrew Little.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to speak on the Victims' Orders Against Violent Offenders Bill and just note that, as we have said throughout this debate, this bill will do some good things. It responds to a pretty obvious and clear-cut case where a device like a non-contact order was needed in Invercargill, in which a rape victim was, on the completion of the offender's sentence, then harassed and presumably intimidated by the offender in the period following it. And she had no recourse or no ability to do anything about it. So this will certainly fill that gap, and it is for that reason that, of course, we support it. But it is deficient in a number of respects. And I think a government that was genuinely focused on victims' rights and protecting victims would have ensured that the victim didn't have to meet the cost of seeking and applying for and obtaining one of these orders. That would be a very simple thing for a government to do and to ensure that the legislation covered, because they could have ensured that an order such as this could have been provided for either at the time of sentencing, if the sentence was a non-custodial sentence on the offender, or during the parole process if the offender was sentenced to prison, certainly for a prison sentence of longer than 2 years. But this government didn't want to do that, because this government has developed a strong track record of talking large but doing the bare minimum. And this is just yet another example of that. And this government is developing a track record, of course, of, as it goes into this election, of not wanting to defend its poor track record, of not wanting to defend its poor performance, not only in this, in relation to victims and criminal justice, but in a whole host of other areas. Which is why we now have a party in government that has stooped to the lowest levels of the gutter, sliming and slipping its way through to divert attention from its own appalling track record. Because it just doesn't want to have to defend itself on what it's done, because what it's done has been so appalling. And in this case, when it comes to victims and victims' rights, it has a pretty poor record. There is a lot of it could have done. It's had 6 years to step up to the plate and do some real things when it comes to victims. But I know the Prime Minister swans around New York, swans around Washington, pulling the strings of his party organisation and his office back here to dish up 11-year-old letters and make allegations against others in this House, because they know they don't want to defend their track record come this election. Everything they can do to divert the public's attention from actually any real serious issue, it will do it, because it has now reached the grubby, low levels of the gutter, slipping and sliming its way through, Mr Speaker, because it cannot stomach the fact that in the next few weeks, in the next couple of months, it's actually going to have to defend its appalling track record. And at a time when victims are suffering, at a time when they cut $40 million out of the police budget, they cut many millions more out of the justice budget, at a time when courthouses can't even protect courtroom exhibits in their courthouses. Police pistols that were the exhibit in a criminal matter nicked from the New Plymouth Courthouse, they can't defend that. They can't defend that. And when police stations around the country are either closing down or cannot do their job, police cannot get training on their Glock pistols because this government's cut their budget. Police cars having to be rolled over way beyond the 100,000 kilometre rate. And Stephen Joyce comes in here smiling away because they love it. They don't care about the fact that the people who are the worst victims of a run-down police force and a run-down justice system are the poor and the indigent, the people who cannot fend for themselves. That's what this government has come to. And that's why they will engage in the politics of diversion, of dissembling. Lowest crime rate, it's the lowest reported crime rate, because you're only going to talk to frontline police. Not somebody that Stephen Joyce will have spoken to for a long time. You talk to the frontline police. You talk to the Defence Council. You talk to the Crown Solicitors in this country, and they will tell you what an absolute shambles criminal justice in the system is. People have given up. They've given up reporting it now because they get told, well, the police can't be there. You know, victims of crime now are being told, you take the photos, you make up the report and bring it down to the station when you've got a spare moment. That's what people are being told, Mr. Speaker, and victims of serious crime are no better off. And the government knows that this bill will be a baby step compared to the significant steps that are required to afford them better protection. Well, that's disappointing, Mr. Speaker, that's disappointing, but that's the government we've got. It's the government we've got at the moment, but it's the government that the people of New Zealand know is about to go. It is on its way out, because the people of New Zealand want a government that identifies serious issues and takes serious steps on serious issues, not half-hearted steps, not steps that give the appearance of doing something, but actually put the burden and put the risk back on victims, which is what this bill does. This bill says if you are the victim of a serious crime and you want to be protected from the perpetrator of that crime, you've got to stump up. You write out the cheque. You find a lawyer prepared to make the application. You find a lawyer that you have to pay the cost for to make the application. And you know that if the offender, having received a copy of an interim order or at least the application, the offender controls whether or not there is a hearing. And if the offender demands a hearing, then the victim once again has to stump up for the cost of representation. That's what this bill does. That's how much this government cares about victims and about doing something serious about victims. This government is saying with this bill, here's some protection we'll give you, but you're going to write out the cheque, because we've taken $40 million out of the police, we've taken many millions more out of the courts, and now the burden is on the victim. That's how this government views criminal justice and victims' rights in this country, and it is appalling. And that's why people want an end to it. People want a government in office that takes victims' rights seriously, that provides real protection for victims, not giggling ministers of economic development who laugh at the thought of poor people having to meet the cost of their own protection against offenders in this country. Not backbenchers like Simon O'Connor, who laugh scoffingly at the prospect of poor people who are the victims of serious crime having now to meet the cost of their own protection, because he's happy to be a backbencher and support ministers and cheer them on when they gut the police budget and they gut the Ministry of Justice budget and they gut the courts budget, and they tell victims of crime that they must meet the expense of it. And they don't care that in this bill, that one of the provisions they provide for it, and I know that Mark Mitchell will be most concerned about this because he's dealt with it before, but even when an order is issued from the court, that according to this bill, an offender can apply for a discharge of it at any time. Those are the words, at any time. So no sooner has an order been issued than an offender can rock on up to the court and apply for a discharge. And who will meet the costs of the victim's representation? The victim themselves, once again. Because this government doesn't understand that when 46% of people in this country cannot get a pay rise in any one year, that people are poor, that people can't afford expensive legal services. But if they are the hapless victim of a crime, of a serious crime, to which this bill might apply, they have to stump up and pay for their own protection. That's what this bill does. That's what this bill does. And then the only other remaining question is, of course, because it creates an offence if one of these orders is breached, a bit like protection orders at the moment, is do the police really have the resources to enforce these orders when they are most needed? Can the police summon up the resources with a $40 million cut to their budget to provide protection to victims under one of these orders when it's really needed? Can the police work with victims to prevent a breach of these orders? Well, you'd have to say, Mr. Speaker, on the current track record and what is happening with police these days, you'd say that there is a real risk that once these orders issued, that there will be orders that will go unenforced. And that would be a real pity, because it's all very well putting this stuff on paper, but you've got to back it up with action. And this government has proved time and again that it'll do the window dressing, it'll play the charade, but it is not prepared to back it up with decent resources to protect innocent people. And so, Mr. Speaker, we will look very carefully at the way this rolls out. We will look very carefully, and let us hope that victims in this country get a better deal. They'll get a better deal, it is for sure, but it will be under a different government.
Mark Mitchell.
Mr. Speaker, that sounded like a leadership speech to me. And I'll tell you